I bet you've probably heard the phrase style over substance, right? It's used all the time as a sort of critique when something is more visually appealing than having any sort of artistic merit or having something that just has deeper substance. Though, if I may, I think a lot of people actually use that phrase wrong because sometimes style is your substance. And there isn't something that proves that style can be substance more than fighting games. Let's be real with ourselves. When you're looking around to pick a character to main in a fighting game, it's probably because of a few reasons. A, they look really cool. B, looking wallet-drainingly hot. Or C, they just seem super fun to play. Though, some people also choose characters because they look really funny to them. I know I have. The aesthetic of your fighting game is a massive deal because it is what pulls people in. It creates a filter as to what audiences you want to have and what audiences you don't. Thus, having unique aesthetic, vibe, and design ethos is what would define your game to some extent. For someone who isn't into anime at all, I really doubt you're going to pick up a game like Guilty Gear, BlazBlue, or however you're supposed to say this. But if something is too generic or looks like something you've seen already too much, you aren't going to pick it up either. Street Fighter V definitely got crapped on for good reason early on because, well, it was just doing what Street Fighter 4 did again, but it looked far worse. This isn't really a question of graphical fidelity, as the graphic chuds would tell you, but art style and visual choices are incredibly important to any visual medium, and to me, there isn't a series that has a more unique vibe than Tekken. Well, to some extent. So, some backstory to let you know where I'm coming from. The first fighting game I ever played was Tekken 4. That is if you don't count the surprisingly good fighting game mode in the PS2 Revenge of the Sith tie-in game. Anyways, Tekken was my gateway into the larger world of fighting games, which was quickly followed up by Mortal Kombat Deception and Armageddon on the PS2, and then Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. But Tekken has always held a special place in my heart. It was my first fighting game love after all, but things are also bound to change. Now, that's not inherently a bad thing. Usually things change because they have to. I mean, I doubt Street Fighter would exist today if that series didn't change its aesthetics and vibes over the course of years. However, to me, Tekken was a unique beast when it came to its presentation in the fighting game space. Maybe it is because I started with the 4th entry. Don't worry though, I've gone back and played the other classics too. Tekken always had this more complex and grounded feeling to it. It wasn't inherently about characters trying to save the world, at least not at first, but we'll get to that. It felt dark, mature, and honestly, it scared the hell out of me as a kid. Nothing will ever take away that moment of me playing Tekken 4 for the first time and picking the guy they had in the intro cutscene only to find out that Kazuya's the bad guy? To a child me, that was an incredibly special moment, one that still sticks with me to this day. But Tekken always felt like it was this middle ground between these mystical worlds surrounding martial arts and this technological cyberpunk thriller all mixed into one. It was wholly unique from really any other fighting game I knew. Most fighting games are more or less trying to be super anime like Street Fighter 4, Guilty Gear, and so on, or are super inspired by classic martial arts films like Mortal Kombat is inspired by Enter the Dragon for one. And don't get it twisted, all the games I mentioned are all special in their own right, delivering on their special flavors and feelings all on their own. Yet, there's still nothing quite like Tekken for me. None of these other series really focused on this intergenerational blood feud that pretty much bleeds out into the entire world, making it a worse place because a few men can't just put their pride aside. There's something so brutal and real about all that. But now, I'm sorry to say this, Tekken has kinda lost those vibes to some extent. They're still pretty good games, of course, yet I think we can all agree that Tekken, especially 7, 8, and 6, have more so leaned into being a lot closer in aesthetics and presentation to a lot of their counterparts and peers. Ironically, I'd say Street Fighter 6 is the most unique fighting game out there when it comes to its world design and visual style. Now again, I'm here to say that this isn't inherently a bad thing. In fact, I know a lot of people who love the newer Tekken game's approach to its story and world, and that's perfectly valid. There's a reason why Tekken 7 and 8 are some of the best-selling games of the series. And trust me, it's not because of good press, because, not gonna lie, Tekken has been in a weird spot as of late. Side note here, it was really whack that you had to buy the Season Pass in Tekken 7 just to unlock a frame data display in the training mode. Anyways, let's do a quick little hell sweep through memory lane and catalog how the vibes of Tekken formed into what they are and how we've gotten away from them over time, starting with Tekken 1. Okay, I know this looks a bit rough, but it was 1995, okay? This was groundbreaking for the time, even if it looks like martial law will take my skin from me. Usually the first game in a series doesn't completely nail down what the overall design ethos will be. I mean, you gotta be a franchise first that you would figure that out. Like, a lot of the stuff we love from Sonic doesn't really appear until like Sonic 2, and Devil May Cry doesn't fully come into its own until like Devil May Cry 3. So I don't expect the first game to get there immediately either. Yet there's a lot of key details that do show up here already. One, the blood feud between Kazuya and Heihachi is already here, though at the start we see Kazuya as the good guy, or the traditional protagonist of one of these fighting games. Which is interesting because in comparison to who he'll become, yeah, it's definitely an interesting starting point. We see a lot of cutscenes of him kind of doing some shady stuff, like throwing his father off a cliff like how Heihachi did to him as a child, but for the most part he's presented as the good guy in all this. Also, characters like Nina and Jack have already pulled in a lot of these technological cyberpunky ideas you'll see more focused on in later entries. We're sort of seeing the seedling here, but there's still a bit of edge of Tekken that's peeping up from under the table, but it's not quite able to reach the chair just yet. Just want to add here real quick, the ending with King surrounded by the real green screen-did children is way too funny. This feels like a Smiling Friends bit or something more than a fighting game cutscene. I get why they did this to save on budget, but it just looks too funny today. I can't take it seriously. Though we do see a lot more shifting with Tekken 2 is when we start to see a lot of things leaning into that much heavier and darker tone. And honestly, it does a lot of ideas on a story front that I don't really see done much. For one, Kazuya is the main antagonist of this game, and they show off pretty quickly that he's just as bad, if not worse, than Heihachi. I kinda love this idea that the roles are now reversed. The main character now being Heihachi having to beat his son and regain his company. A complete heel turn versus face turn, you kinda love to see it. Though I think the most important detail here is the introduction of Devil. This is the thing that will basically become a focal point of all Tekken games going forward. And I think it is a major part of what makes Tekken's aesthetic feel so fresh and unique, pulling in these mystical and spiritual ideas that contrast heavily with these science themes. And that contrast, I'd say, is a pretty heavy focus for a lot of the series. A lot of stories revolving around using science to try and understand just what Devil is and how it could be recreated or destroyed. It doesn't feel comic booky in, say, the way Mortal Kombat handles it. What I mean is, Mortal Kombat sort of handles it in a way of, yes, Jax is a cyborg and Shang Tsung is an immortal sorcerer. You just have to accept that. Which is completely fine. I like that Mortal Kombat does that in its setting. It's what makes it campy and fun. But Tekken really tries to focus in and examine on just what all this is and how it integrates all into each other. It also makes the world feel oddly grounded while still having things like a boxing kangaroo or whatever Jack 2 is. Which I'll add here, I think Tekken has really great joke characters, and that mainly focuses on how they make these joke characters. These absurd characters and things are always tied into something either darker within the story or are connected to another character. Like, Kuma on paper is a very fun and stupid idea, to be honest. But when you learn that Kuma is trained and raised by Heihachi as a sort of pet child sparring partner, while absurd, it does add up. Heihachi is a billionaire with so much money to waste. Come on, we've all seen billionaires do stupid things like own tigers, having their name carved into an island to see from space, or paying someone to get them a higher level on PoE 2, LARP as a sci-fi fan all their life, and misquote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What? I'm not mad. I'm just saying Grok's not from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You bum. Anyways, Tekken 2 clearly shows that Tekken's forming into something super unique, but come on, we all know that Tekken truly comes into its own in. Remember when I said earlier that many game series don't fully come into their own until their second or third entry? Well, here's where I'd say Tekken becomes Tekken. For one, we introduce the protagonist of the franchise, Jin. And yes, he is basically the protagonist. The one with the largest overarching plot, the one with the greatest amount of character development, and also character assassination, but we'll get to that later. And maybe the most recognizable design. Plus, we get his best design in this game. This design and his Tekken 4 hood design are tied for me for the best, but I just wanted to add that here because I really like his design. This game goes all in on the darker elements and corporate conspiracy angles introduced in previous games, as well as adding way more to the mystical side of the series. Delving more into the Devil Curse, as well as introducing probably the best boss of the series, Ogre, which is honestly crazy that he's never reappeared in any mainline Tekken games since, but I also kinda respect that because it really feels like whatever's done here is definitive, like you're not gonna undo anything here. But oh man, just look at the intro movie, combining these urban environments and techno themes. It feels like we're entering a mysterious, dark underground world of martial arts espionage and conspiracy. Plus, so many of the most iconic characters are introduced here. Not just Jin, but you also got Xiaoyu, Harong, Eddie Gordo, Gon? Okay, that last one is funny, but he's not that iconic, at least I like Tekken. The music here is also super great too, though Tekken always had great music. Here is probably where Tekken finds its niche in its musical style, either making action-packed techno with some rock-inspired elements or something heavily atmospheric. Not the best music in the series, but it's easily a top 5 Tekken OST for me. Here's also where we get the start of the overarching plot of more or less every mainline Tekken game from here on out. The atmosphere in this game is pretty much almost perfected here. This is debatably the most definitive Tekken game. But after this, we get a bit of a fun but odd side tangent. Tekken Tag Tournament is one game I don't want to focus on that long because it's sort of an anomaly game, mostly continuing a lot of the design ideals from 3, but now on the PS2. Plus, it's what some people would call a dream game, or in other words, a non-canon game that's just meant to be fully enjoyed as an arcadey experience or a crossover. You know, those fun non-canon crossovers without too much influence in the whole series, stuff like that. It's comparable to what King of Fighters does every 3 to 4 games, or any Capcom Versus game. Plus, this game was developed in like 3 months, so it's very much a game of let's make something fun out of all these leftover scraps we have. And that's not an insult because it is a fun and really good game. But I wouldn't say this game is super influential on the series' aesthetic and core and ideals, especially not as much as... I've already made a video on Tekken 4. Like I said earlier, it's the first one I played. But I still believe that when it comes to pure atmosphere, music, design, aesthetics, it's probably my favorite, if not the best one. Tekken 4 is the most experimental of the series, and because of that, it sets a lot of precedents. I'd say that this game, much like Tekken 3 before it, leans way heavier into the corporate war ideas and concepts, as well as bringing in some important events and aspects, such as, at least to my knowledge, introducing the actual concept of the Devil Gene, which is a bit of a retcon on what the Devil even is in this series, but nobody minds because it's way more interesting to make it an interesting genetic phenomena. Also, bringing in G-Corp more into the story as a rival faction to the Mishima Zaibatsu, Heihachi's company, with Kazuya as its primary leader, at least that's what it seems. This, to me, is when they reach the peak of Tekken's story conceptually, aesthetically, and character-wise. I mean, centering your fighting game tournament plot around a corporate shadow war is possibly one of the most unique ideas I've seen in a fighting game. It feels like there's so much mystery and unknowns in this world that have yet to be answered. And let's be real, this game is practically the peak of that Y2K aesthetic, or as some people call it, digital apocalypse, which is one of the few aesthetic names that actually feels like it describes it very well, actually. I'd actually give them a thumbs up on that. This to me is aesthetically more or less taking what Tekken 3 was introducing and sort of mutating it to become more impactful and further influence the series. Luckily, Tekken 4 also has the ability to lean more into the lighter side of the PS2 era aesthetic as well, with bouncy, fun, calming levels. I mean, the beach levels theme alone, it's called Kitsch by the way, is pretty iconic. I'd say maybe this is a bit Fruita Gear Arrow, but I don't think it's too good of a description either. I want to add here, this game probably has my favorite copycat character in all of fighting games, Combat. I know people love Mokujin, but I feel like conceptually, Combat is much more intriguing of a concept. A robot sent into a tournament as both a press stunt and a trial run for a robot that learns martial arts by examining other people. It's kinda lame that they never bring this idea back in any mainline games, but I think it's a really cool note to add this feeling to the game, you know? So to me, I think Tekken 4 is aesthetically the peak of the series. But since it wasn't too beloved gameplay-wise and was pretty controversial when it came out, I think the team did justifiably pull back and change a few things in a few areas for the next game. Speaking of which, I'd say Tekken 5 all around is maybe the best game in the series. It's my number 2 after another game on this list, and vibes-wise, it's also one of the best. I will say it leans into some more crazier and absurd directions compared to the last 4 games, but I don't think it goes far enough to really hurt anything or ruin the feeling. Put a pin in that thought for later because you'll see what I mean in a second. I'd say its tone is comparable to Tekken 3's, but maybe with a bit more action sprinkled on top. This game's also way more willing to lean into comedy. This is pretty much the game where they make Paul and Law full comedic relief characters, and they don't really recover from this, which is a bit of a shame. Paul went from being a pretty legit character to a joke, and yeah, that kinda sucks, I'll be honest, but what can you do? Things change. I kind of feel like this game wanted to be the end of the whole Jin Kazuya Heihachi feud, but I think later on they realized that they still needed a core plot and had nowhere to really go. Honestly, this is the first game that I would describe as a little bit stereotypically anime, but it's not going all in on that. Here is where I think something starts to shift just a little bit here. But the next game, let's just talk about it. Tekken 6 is probably my least favorite game in the series, and this game just goes full anime, 100%, no stop, all gas, no brakes. The main character is a ninja, and also a secret third son of Heihachi. Okay, jokes aside, Lars is actually not a bad character. He's fine. Maybe not the most memorable, but he's fine. What's not fine here is that Jin has probably one of the biggest character assassinations that I've ever seen in fiction, and he didn't really quite bounce back from it for a while. And then there's Alyssa. I'm gonna just say this real quick for a minute. Alyssa is my least favorite character in Tekken. Like every other character before her, and even in Tekken 6, has a layer of realism to them, and the machines were very clearly machines, like there was something different about them that you could pick up on. So there was a clear intent that like machine-based characters had something off about them, making a clear separation between human and machine. Now here comes Alyssa, who quite literally looks like any generic anime girl from 2005 to 2015. Look, I want to add here, I don't hate anime. I like anime. There's a lot of great anime I like, and I like all sorts of anime games too. But that specific look is not really what Tekken was. And oh man, the plot. Look, remember how I said the premise of Tekken was built around a dark corporate underworld creating a tournament and then all these Shadow War elements influencing things within it? Yeah, throw all that out the window. Jin just deadass starts World War III in this game. Like, Jin is just objectively evil in this game, and it's a bad story, man. I know stories are meant to change over time, but this is the biggest whiplash I've seen in a story since, like, Steins Gate. But see, that's good in Steins Gate and not in Tekken, because Steins Gate uses the whiplash to create one of the best time travel stories ever written, while Tekken 6 over here is basically opening up its bum and making a huge flood all over Jin and the other characters. I'm sorry, the anger's coming out of me in a way that's a little bit too extreme. Let's not go full AVGN on this, shall we? But I still gotta say, what happened to the Shadow World, cyberpunk, and martial arts vibes? Like, it's kinda sorta there, but it's buried under this whole war arc of the story. Look, this is clearly a vast difference from the last few games. The game still brings in a lot of cool things, sure. It's the first time we've had Rage, not Rage Art, just Rage. It also brings in a lot of focus on character customization and some cool characters too. But man, the vibes on this one are rotten, man. And that's not considering the forced story and character assassination of the guy of the series, Jin. Well, was the guy, but then he wasn't. They basically had to make Tekken 8's story about redeeming the character in the eyes of the viewer, but that'll come later. However, we do have a nice reprieve in the next game. So full disclosure, this is my favorite Tekken game. It brings in every character from past games and it has a great soundtrack. I mean, how could anyone hate a fighting game with a Snoop Dogg stage? But kind of like the first tag game, it doesn't exactly have a large impact on the ethos and vibes of the series, except for the fact it was the first game to integrate some crossover ideas in the Wii U version, and yeah, they were cool, I guess. I will say though, I kind of love the vibes of this game. It's not anywhere near the immaculate style of Tekken 3, 4, and 5, but this game feels like a party, like a celebration concert of Tekken, and I can really appreciate that as a fan of the series since a child. You don't really see this kind of happy-go-lucky tone in many other Tekken games, and I can appreciate that too. It's kind of a nice break. Though the next game is debatably one of the most interesting and complicated ones for me to discuss. Tekken 7 is a game I have mixed feelings on. Gameplay-wise, I'll admit I didn't care for it as much as the last few, excluding 6. I still think 6 is debatably one of the weirdest gameplay-wise. But this one was just marred by weird corporate decisions from Bandai Namco. Plus, there were a few oddities when it came to the history of this game, such as balancing or even straight up removing moves from movesets between patches, which I've always been a little bit mixed on, to be honest. However, I kinda like the story of this game. It's not inherently going back to the ideas of the first 5 games. Instead, it's a story that is here to humanize Heihachi more, making him into a more fleshed out person. Not just an evil man, but someone who's complicated and has made bad decisions. He's still pretty evil, don't get me wrong, but there's some interesting reasons for his actions here. There's a lot of great moments in this story mode, and honestly, maybe some of the best writing in the series. It's not perfect, the framing device with this investigator is sort of unneeded, and at points it can feel a little bit rushed, but the core elements of the story are super impactful, and actually made me care for a man who, before, was pretty much unredeemable. Also, Akuma is here. This is also a game where they start making a lot of the male characters way more buff than they used to be. Some of these guys look just straight up like Baki characters, and I'm not against characters being super muscular or anything like that, but the body diversity in old games actually was one of the aspects I really appreciated. Like, King being super buff makes sense because he's literally a luchador, but why are Martial Law's pecs the size of a dinner plate when he's literally based on Bruce Lee? On the other hand, I get there's meant to be more of an element of making characters more stylized and distinct to some extent, but The characters were already pretty stylized before, I don't think there was anything really wrong with them. It's not that it's an inherently bad thing to be fair, but I'll admit, I do kind of miss when there was a bit more body diversity in the Tekken games. Not saying there isn't any body type diversity in Tekken 7, but I think there's a bit less of it in my opinion. I will say though, this has my favorite Yoshimitsu design. I don't know, it just looks really interesting and it looks so alien, you know? And honestly, a lot of the stages here are pretty interesting too. I will say the music does lean a little bit more hard into more traditional EDM. I don't know if it's the right word for it, but it kind of sounds dubstep-ish, but I think it works here. Some tracks I'm not really too in love with, but other ones I really love. It kind of feels like this game is a step in a direction that I really like, and then some steps where I'm like, not too great. But I do think that it's a step in the right direction after 6. But the next game, and the most recent game, is definitely an interesting one to talk about as well. And now we're finally here. Tekken 8, the current last game of the series, and more or less the end of a lot of elements introduced in Tekken 6. And much like the last game, there's things here I like and things I really don't. For one, they go way further into making characters more muscular than before, and it works for some characters and not others. Some designs definitely lean into some more unique directions than others, and some are just kind of the same. Personally, I love the gator skin coat on Kazuya. It's probably his best design, and making him more buff does make sense. I do miss the more slim Kazuya, but I'm not gonna complain. This does look pretty good too. But I kinda hate Lee's look in this game. Like, was the purple suit not unique enough? Now he just kinda looks like a generic grunt in a Metal Gear game. The story leans back into the war conflict stuff from Tekken 6, and I don't feel too cool with that since I didn't really like it in the first place. Though I appreciate that they have a character-centric story about Jin, redeeming him from the terrible crap he did in Tekken 6. I do think it's a bit rushed though, and they kind of force a lot of the character development into like the last hour to 30 minutes. But I appreciate the writers trying to get even further with these characters and make the story develop with them. I will say visually too, this might be one of the best Tekken games graphically, and art style wise, it's pretty solid. Again, I do think there's elements here that are missing, but I'm not gonna act like activating heat and then seeing like the world slow down, you see that kind of thing drag after you. That's cool. And I also like the heat system. I know some people don't, but I actually think it's a really good idea, especially since rage art is kind of more of a comeback mechanic, and this is more of a pressure tool. I haven't really played Tekken 8 though after like the last few patches, because yeah, that game's pretty unbalanced at the moment, it's not really fun to play. But I do think Tekken 8 has done a lot of steps in the right direction, and a few that I don't really care for, but that's just gonna keep happening it seems, and that's okay. But hey, which Tekken's your favorite? And which has your favorite vibes? I think there's many valid ways to view this franchise, and maybe I'm a bit of an old head, but I really appreciate the style of those first 5 mainline games. But who knows? Maybe we'll see some of those elements come back. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And yeah, that's all I really gotta talk about today. I've actually been sitting on this video idea for a while because I really like Tekken and fighting games in general, but I also kind of feel like it's hard to talk about fighting games to a more mainstream audience. And I don't know, it kind of seems like a lot of fighting game YouTube doesn't really seem to be recommended on, well, YouTube. I don't know. Algorithms are weird, dog. I'm not gonna act like I understand them. I'm not gonna be throwing around buzzwords just to act like I know something. But what do you think, genuinely? Down below, tell me. There's a lot of valid reasons to why someone would like the later game's vibes. Again, I don't really like a lot of the vibes coming out of specifically 6 and 8, but there's still elements I can enjoy too. But let's also keep the discussion civil, okay? Let's not be throwing around any weird words or anything like that. And with all that being said, I'll see you next time.